If you stand outside Shinjuku Station at 7 in the morning, you're watching one of the most organized human migrations on the planet. Thousands of people in dark suits, moving in the same direction, at the same speed, all of them carrying the same kind of bag. And somewhere in that crowd, there are people who did not wake up in an apartment that morning. They woke up in a private booth roughly the size of a parking space, inside a 24-hour internet cafe, with a shower down the hall and a coin locker holding everything they own. Then they changed into a clean shirt, walked out into the street, and became invisible again. That's the strange thing about homelessness in Japan. On paper, the country has almost solved it. In January of 2025, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare sent staff out with clipboards to count every person sleeping rough in the entire country, and they found 2,591 people in a nation of about 123 million. Back in 2003, that same count found 25,296, so we're talking about a drop of nearly 90% in 20 years. And honestly, a lot of that is real. Japan passed a law aimed at getting people off the street, built transitional shelters, expanded welfare support, and it worked for a lot of people. But that number only measures one very specific thing. The survey counts people sleeping in parks, along riverbanks, at the side of roads, and in station buildings. Sleep in a net cafe cubicle or in your car, and you simply don't exist in the data. Which raises the obvious question: how does someone work full days in one of the richest cities in the world and still not have an apartment? The answer has two parts, and both of them go back to the 1980s. In the late 80s, Japan was doing spectacularly well. Japanese cars and Japanese electronics were selling everywhere. Money was cheap because the Bank of Japan had cut its rate down to 2.5%, and all of that cash went looking for somewhere to sit. It found land. The mechanism was almost beautifully simple. A bank lends you money, you buy land, the price of land goes up. So the bank looks at your land and sees more valuable collateral, so it lends you more, so you buy more land. Picture a company borrowing to buy a plot worth 100 million yen. Prices in the neighborhood rise, the plot is suddenly worth 150 million, and that extra 50 million becomes borrowing power for the next purchase. Do that across an entire economy, and prices don't just rise, they detach. Bank lending to non-banks, much of it heading into real estate, doubled in 4 years. And people stopped buying land because they needed it. They bought it because they were sure somebody would pay more for it later. There was even a phrase for the belief holding the whole thing up: land in Japan never goes down. Well, the Bank of Japan eventually got nervous about what it had built, and between May 1989 and August 1990, it pushed its discount rate from 2.5% all the way up to 6%. Borrowing got expensive, buyers disappeared, and the machine went into reverse. The Nikkei peaked at 38,915 on the 29th of December 1989, and then spent the next 2.5 years losing roughly 2/3 of its value. Land was slower. It held on until about 1991, and then it fell for more than a decade. In the worst-hit urban areas, prices dropped by 70% or more. Now, falling land prices on their own don't break a banking system. If a company's land loses value but the company keeps paying its loan, the bank is fine. The problem shows up when the payments stop. A company owes 100 million yen. The land backing that loan is now worth 70. The bank seizes it and sells it, and 30 million yen just evaporates. That happened across thousands of companies simultaneously, and Japanese banks ended up holding an enormous pile of loans that were never coming back. So companies did what companies do when they're carrying huge debt and shrinking assets. They stopped investing, they stopped expanding, and they went after their biggest fixed cost, which was people. And this is where it stops being a thing about finance and starts being a story about a booth in Shinjuku. Before all this, a lot of Japanese workers had a deal. You joined a company more or less for life, and in exchange, you got security, seniority, pay, and very often company housing, called shataku, where your employer either owned the apartment or covered most of the rent. Housing wasn't really a problem you had to solve by yourself, because your employer solved it for you. Then, from the 1990s onward, companies started pulling out of housing welfare altogether. After the crash, firms froze hiring and started filling roles with contract workers and part-timers instead. Around 1990, roughly 20% of Japanese employees were in that kind of non-regular non-regular work. By May of 2026, it was 36.3%, about 21 million people. And non-regular work in Japan doesn't just mean lower pay. It means a contract that gets renewed every few months, which is exactly the piece of paper a bank looks at when you apply for a mortgage, and exactly what a landlord asks about when you apply for an apartment. Meanwhile, yes, housing got cheaper. A house falling from 100 million yen to 60 sounds like great news, right up until you notice that your job got less secure at the same time. Your pay stopped rising, and the banks got a lot pickier about who they lend to. A cheaper house you can't qualify for is not a cheaper house. And then there's the thing nobody outside Japan expects, which is the sheer cost of just moving in. Renting an apartment there typically means paying 4 to 6 months of rent before you get the keys. There's a refundable deposit, usually 1 or 2 months. There's the agency fee, about a month. There's your first month's rent, fire insurance, and a fee to a guarantor company if you don't have someone willing to co-sign for you. And there's key money, Reiken. 1 or 2 months of rent handed to the landlord as a gesture of thanks, which you never see again. That last one is fading, and 0 key money listings are common now, but for a 100,000 yen apartment, you're still often looking at 400,000 to 600,000 yen up front. Now compare that to an internet cafe at around 1,500 yen a night. Showers, free drinks, Wi-Fi, laundry, a reclining chair, and no deposit, no guarantor, no questions. For someone with an unstable contract, it is the only door that opens. The cruel part is the math, because 1,500 yen a night is about 45,000 a month, which is real rent money that never turns into an actual apartment. I know what you're thinking, and it's the same thing I thought. Japan has empty houses, millions of them. The 2023 National Housing Survey found 9 million vacant homes, 13.8% of the entire housing stock, both record highs. So why not just put people in them? Because that 9 million figure isn't 9 million usable homes sitting there waiting. About 4.4 million are rentals nobody has taken. 330,000 are up for sale. 380,000 are holiday homes. The really abandoned ones, the IKEA everybody writes articles about, number around 3.85 million, and they're concentrated in prefectures that are emptying out. Wakayama and Tokushima both sit above 21% vacancy. Many need renovations that cost more than the house. Demolition runs 1 to 1.5 million yen, and a lot of them are stuck in inheritance limbo with owners who can't be found. The houses are where the jobs aren't, and the people are where the houses cost a fortune. Which brings us to right now, and the part that makes this less of a history lesson. Tokyo rents have risen for more than 2 years straight, up somewhere between 6.5 and 8.2% year on year in the 23 wards, with the average single-person apartment passing 114,000 yen a month. Land prices in 2026 posted their strongest annual rise since 1992. Japanese wages are finally moving too, with spring negotiations in 2026 delivering an average 5.46% increase, the largest since records began in 1976. But housing costs are still running ahead of that. So it would be too neat to say the bubble created the men sleeping in booths in Shinjuku. It didn't, not directly. What it did was rearrange the ground underneath them, breaking the link between having a job and having a home, and then leaving that gap open for 30 years, while a whole industry of cheap overnight cubicles grew to fill it. And that's what makes the number at the top of this so uncomfortable. Japan's homeless count is one of the lowest in the developed world, and it's not a lie. It's just measuring the people outside. Everyone else moved indoors, where nobody's counting.